Before we talk about LOD statement, let's create this graph. We're going to drag TR site code, emp last name, and unit price onto the rows shelf. We're going to drag transaction date, TR transaction date to the columns shelf, and TR trans type into filters. For unit price, take the average. For TR trans date, take the month, truncated time. So this now is showing us for each employee within different sites, what is the average unit price that they have paid for orders? And we're doing this by month, so it's monthly average unit prices for orders, meaning for purchases. Say we want to add some other averages here, so maybe we want to create an average of each employee's monthly unit prices. Well, we can do that by adding a reference line, and we do average and per pane, and now we get an average. And notice these averages are different. Here's 4.225. Here the average is 4.724. So these averages are different for each employee because we selected per pane. If we say entire table, we now get an average that's the same for all of them. This is 3.347, 3.347, and so on. Then when we come down to Illinois, it's also 3.347. So now it's the same for all the data. So all panes have the same average now. So this is a company average. However, say we want to compare each employee's monthly averages to the average for that state. That's not as simple as this, and we can't use reference lines to achieve this. So what we're going to need to do is use something called an LOD statement. And LOD statements allow us to aggregate the data based on fields that are not necessarily included in the view. So it allows us to do aggregation independent of the fields that are in the view. It's not completely independent, but let's talk about these a little bit more detail, and that should become clearer. First of all, there's three different types of LOD statements. There's fixed, there's include, and there's exclude. To create an LOD statement, you create a calculated field, and this is called this exclude. And to create an LOD statement, you do curly brackets, and then you state what kind of LOD statement are you using. So the first word will be exclude, include, or fixed. And then when it comes to an exclude statement, we're going to be excluding some field that we're currently aggregating on in the view. So for example, if we exclude emp last name, that means we're aggregating still on month, still on TR site code, but we're excluding emp last name from that grouping. And what is it we're going to be doing? What aggregate function are we going to apply to this new grouping that we did? Well, so I'm going to do an average, and I'm going to average unit prices again. And I need to add emp last name is incorrect, so emp last name. This is now valid. So again, this is saying that I'm going to exclude emp last name, I'm going to include everything else, and then based on that new grouping that I have done, I'm going to apply an aggregate function called average to TR unit price. And if I add this exclude here, now I get a new line down here, and say I want these to be on the same pane. I'm going to go to show me and do a dual axis chart. I can't do that right now because this is an attribute. So I'm going to change this to a measure, and I'm going to average this one. And then I can say show me, and now it's available. And I'm going to change this to a line. And then I'm going to go ahead and synchronize the axis. And I'm going to remove this header. And now I can see the results better. So notice here now, for example, that the average here for the exclude statement is 3.3, 3.3, 3.3, and so on. And notice that all these are in California. The average here is now 3.36. Well, that's a different average because we're now in Florida. But for Florida, all of them are the same. So we have 3.36. So what now this is showing me that monthly average unit price for each site. I'm no longer aggregating on the employee last name. Let's go ahead and look at include. So I'm just going to copy this one. So I'm going to say duplicate, and then let's go ahead and open up this one, and let's call this include. So here I'm going to include TR item. So when we're purchasing things, we're purchasing different materials, and these are called items in the transaction table. So now I'm going to be including, I need to change this statement to be an include. So I'm going to include an additional field in my aggregation here. So I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to drag this new calculation onto here, and let's remove the exclude, and then I'm going to average this, and then I'm going to do dual axis again. What this now is showing me is that I'm aggregating based on site code employee last name for each month, and I'm only doing orders. But I'm also aggregating in the LOD statement based on TR item. I have now many averages for each employee. So I have one average for each employee for each material that they have purchased. I then, in the view here, I take an average of those averages from the LOD statement. So if we add transaction item here, notice these values here. I have 2.58, 6.87, and 1.84. If I take the average of this, I get 3.76. So if we remove item again, notice for this employee here, the average is 3.763. The average unit price though paid is not an average of the averages for different items. It's an average of all the transactions for that employee. So of course, if the number of transactions for each item purchase were the same, then these two averages would be the same. So an include adds another dimension that we're aggregating based on, and then that LOD statement outputs some results that are then aggregated further in the view. An exclude removes one of the dimensions that are being aggregated based on in the view and aggregates that together. A fixed statement defines what to aggregate on independent of what's being done in the view, and then outputs the results, and then that results may be aggregated more or further if the results from the fixed aggregation is at a finer level than the view is. So let's go ahead and create a fixed statement. I'm going to create a calculated field. I'm going to call this fixed, and we're going to do curly brackets. I'm going to start by saying fixed, and then say we do tr site code, and I need to do tr trans type 2 here. And the reason why I add tr trans type here is because I'm aggregating independent of what's in here. So if I didn't include this value, I would not be aggregating based on trans type, meaning I would be aggregating both orders and sales together. And of course, that's not good because I don't want to aggregate both orders and sales. I want to aggregate orders separately and sales separately, and then I can filter away groups transactions that are sales and only keep orders. Okay, so right now I'm aggregating on TR site code and trans type. And then what am I going to do? What aggregate function I'm going to apply? I'm going to do an average, and again it's going to be a TR unit price. And I'm going to close out that average. And this should be a regular colon, not a semicolon. And now if I drag this onto here, I'm going to remove my include, and then I'm going to do a dual axis on this. And it doesn't matter here, but I'm going to average this. So notice here now that these averages are constant over time, but they're different for different sites. So here's 3.2 and here's 3.1. And that's because I'm aggregating based on site code and trans type and nothing else. Notice that they're also constant over time. Well, that's because I'm not aggregating on a time dimension. I could create a calculated field that finds out the month of a year, for example. So if I do create calculated field, and let's call this transaction date month, and I'm going to do month function, and I'm going to use the tr trans date and then output that. So this calculated field simply do transaction date of the month, and then I can include that in my fixed statement. Say OK. And now notice now that we still have the same averages for each site, and that these are different for different sites. But notice now that these are not constant over time for each employee. And that's because we're now aggregating in the fixed statement based on month as well. So that's an overview of LOD statements. One additional thing about fixed, if the fixed is done at a lower level of detail than the view, then just as happened when we did the include, we're going to be taking an average of the averages. So we're first going to create an LOD aggregation that does something with the data, so groups it somehow. And then the LOD results is aggregated further in the view. So if the LOD statement is aggregating at a lower level or finer level of detail than the view, then the view aggregates the LOD results further.